Okay, what's up guys? So I'm going to show you how to do a full setup on your guitar. Today I'm going to use my T-style prototype. I'm going to show you the different parts of the setup, and we're going to do it in pieces so that you can walk through the process with me. So we're going to do the first things first is we're going to go ahead and take these strings off, and then we're going to throw some new strings on. So for this guitar in particular, these are Godo locking tuners. They're top locking. So let's go ahead and we're going to put our screwdriver in the slot. And then we're going to hold it. And then we're going to loosen the string. Same thing, we're going to loosen it. Hold it with the screwdriver. And then let the string be loose. Now, if you watched my video on how to set up PRS wing tuners, these are essentially the same concept. However, instead of the wing being on the outside, locking down, it's the locking mechanism inside that goes up. So, essentially, if I pull this off here, you're going to see that there is a piece here, a flush piece of metal, and then in the cap is where the string goes through. And as you tighten or loosen the key, that turns this, and that will either bring this in closer or farther away, and that's what locks down on the string. So go ahead and get this last string out. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and pull the old strings out of the guitar. Okay, now with the old strings out, let's go ahead and look at how we take care of the fingerboard. So strings are off, time for the fingerboard. I use this brand called Zona. You can find a link for it on Amazon through my links below. And essentially, we've got 600 grit to 1200 to 18 to 8,000 to 10,600, then a 22,000 grit. So this is the new stuff. I personally keep it around for a bit. I'll kind of wear through it till it's completely dead before I throw them away. We'll leave this out here so we can see it. So what I do is I bought this piece of felt. I've had it for 5-6 years now. It's from a luthier supply company that's no longer around. But it's just a big chunk of felt. You could also do like a school board eraser. If you could find an old, or not an old, but a blackboard eraser. Not used preferably because you don't want all the chalk in it. And if you don't know what I mean by a blackboard eraser, well, I'm officially old. So we're going to wrap the 600 grit in your felt or whatever you're using. And we're just going to go from side to side on the frets. And we're going to go up and down the fingerboard. And then I go from side to side, and then I do more like angled strokes because you really just want to hit it from all angles. If you just continue side to side, you're only really creating micro scratches in one direction. And when you buff it out, you're literally removing all the previous scratches with finer scratches till you can't see them. So you don't want to just go one direction because then you're not really going to be able to get those scratches out. You want to go back and forth multiple ways to really cancel them out, I guess you could say. Okay, so I'm happy with about the 600. Now we're gonna move to my 8. No, I'm not, sorry, not 800, 1200. Now on acoustics, I will stop at the blue. On the electrics, I usually go all the way up to about the teal, which is 10,000 grit. I use the white, but I don't, the white is so fine that it's more just a nice polishing cloth for the frets at the end of it, in all honesty. Now, I would recommend, if this is your first time doing this, to take some masking tape and protect the top of your instrument. I've used this block enough that I know exactly where I can and can't go, and I don't hit the top of the instrument. And while it looks like I'm going fast, I actually have a lot of control. And then I'm just going to do a little circle movement all the way up. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to switch to the light blue. Okay. Go up and down. Now, I would probably only do this to my instrument maybe once, twice a year. Because while you are polishing out the frets, we are going low enough that you are actually removing some material. So I don't recommend doing it every string change. I don't think that most instruments need fret polishing every string change. I guess it depends on how often you change your strings. For my guys on the road, we change them after every show. So probably every 2-3 months, I'll wipe them down with the 10,600 grit, just to knock off any of the dullness that might be getting there. And then I'd say once a tour cycle, usually before it, I do this to each of the instruments. And once you keep your frets cared for, like the first time you do it, it might take a lot longer and you might have to spend more time cleaning them out. But as long as you get them dressed and taken care of regularly, like once you start to see divots, if you take care of them, this is really just this is more just fret maintenance that happens over time than it is, like a big care thing. So we're going to stop here at the pink for now, and then we're going to clean the fingerboard. Now, right now I'm working through all the grits for the sake of the video. But let's say you change your strings, let's say once a month, and you just want to make sure that you keep the nice high shine on them and keep it playing and bending smoothly. I would say hit it with the aqua, which is a 2 micron, and then hit it with the white, which is a 1 micron, once a month to keep it really smooth. If you're someone who really beats up your frets and adds a lot of scratches to them, maybe go down to pink or light blue, which light blue is 1800. Yeah. But it really depends on the player. I just don't like to constantly be sanding them because it does remove material. And I know there's other products that you can use out there. I'm not a fan of Gorgamite. The Frying stuff from Music Nomad is cool. Used to use some metal polish, which was fine. But unless you're very diligent, it will kind of be weird with the wood. I haven't used that in like a decade. But yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and clean the board. So for the choice of oil, you can go 2 different routes. Music Nomad sells this F1 oil, that's great. I've also been a big fan of this Feed and Wax wood polish and conditioner. I think both of them are just as good. I kind of like this because it's a little bit more on the more natural side, but this is also more guitar marketed, so we're going to use that for today. To clean, we are going to use a microfiber cloth that's just for the fingerboard and just a spray bottle of water. Not getting the electronics. And we're just going to get a little bit of water on that board, which also helps open up the grain for when we apply the oil or wood conditioner. And right now we're just really wiping off the frets, wiping off the board, just kind of cleaning it without any harsh chemicals. I feel like a little bit of water can go a long way in most good stuff guitar related. You don't always have to have super harsh chemicals to clean it. Now, if your fingerboard looks like you just ate some Cheetos or some cheese blocks before you played, you've got all that finger junk, then you might need some more, harsh chemicals, or you might want a toothbrush or a razor blade to scrape it. But this is just a normal guitar with some normal play. Cool, I like that. So for this video, we're going to use a Music Nomad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a few drops up and down the fingerboard. So we're going to do, you don't really need a lot. Now, I will say after putting water on the board, it does open up the wood grain a little bit. So sometimes it does accept a little bit more oil. So if it was completely dry, I would be using a little bit less. But because I just sprayed it with some water, I'm going to use a little bit more than normal. Making sure you hit the sides of the fingerboard as well, above the nut. Because all that's still wood, exposed wood, so you still want to make sure that you get it all conditioned. Rubbing the bottom. Looks good to me. Now we're going to wipe off any of the excess off. Okay, so we've cleaned our fingerboard, we've cleaned the frets. So we stop at the pink. We're just going to hit the aqua, and then we're going to move on. So I'm going to take my aqua sheet. And now for this, we're not really wanting to touch the wood. So we're just going to very gently go up and down. And side to side. Side angle. And those are shiny. Okay, so the real proof is in the pudding. So let's actually look and see. And they're pretty, I don't see any scratches on the sides or on the top, so I'm happy with that. Now, before we move on, this is my flannel fret cloth. So it's just a nice piece of flannel. And we are going to individually polish with just the flannel in our finger each individual fret. I just find that flannel works the best for fret material, and it just leaves it shinier and less, I feel like if you just wipe it down with like a normal polishing cloth, sometimes you can get like kind of like a smudge across the fret, and this really allows the fret to shine and not have any smudges. So we're just going to go up and down each fret. I can feel it with my fingers even though I can't see it. Perfect. Now let's put fresh strings on it. So we're going to do some Ernie Ball Paradigms 11 to 54s. Now we're going to flip the guitar over and string it all at once. Okay? Now before we lay it down, we're going to make sure all the strings are pulled out. Now, I have other videos already uploaded, and I will be uploading more in the future on different styles of tuners. For this, we're going to kind of do, or for this video, I'm just going to use what's on here. So for this, it's very simple. You're going to line it up to where the string will slide through. Because these are top locking, sometimes you might have to, undo the top a little bit for the string to pull through. So we've got the string through, and then I'm just going to tighten it. And then it'll do its thing. Perfect. Next string, let's loosen it up a little bit. There we go. Now, one of the things on the lower strings is you might have to freshly trim them. Because sometimes when they come from the factory, they were just like not so cleanly cut. Sometimes you'll have little pieces hanging off. That makes it a little bit thicker than, what can go through these passes. But no biggie. If so, just cut off a little bit. Okay. I'm not the biggest fan of locking tuners. I know a lot of guys are, and I understand why. I just think, I think if the guitar is built well, has good, has a good quality cut nut, properly regulated saddles, strung correctly and properly stretched out and set up correctly, I think it plays a lot less in the tuning than people think that the locking tuners will. Now, if you're going from like $10 Bobo brand tuners to like really nice locking tuners, then the argument becomes like, well, is it the locking tuners that are better? Or is it just that you went from, like a cheap $10 set of tuners to like something worth its salt? With that being said, there are locking tuners on this, and as soon as Godot releases them in the 510 style without the locking mechanism, I will be buying a pair. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug it in. We've got our Peterson tuner here. Now, before I tune it to pitch, I'm going to put my hand here in the middle of the headrest, which is about the 3rd or 5th fret. And I'm going to use my left hand to pull the string out of the nut slot. And then with my right hand, I'm going to pull on the string a little bit. And I'll lower it back in. And what this is doing is this is allowing me to pre-stretch it before you really get tension on it. But also by pulling the string out of the nut slot, there's a lot less chance for me to pull the string at somewhat of an angle and snapping the nut slot. I might just break the string. Okay. One string down. Okay, so we got the string back on. We've pre-stretched them. Now let's tune it to pitch. So we are going to do a half step on this. Okay, so we're going to tune. Okay, so we are a half step down now. What's the next step? So we've taken the old strings off, we've put new strings on, and in the between that, we cleaned the fingerboard, we conditioned it, and we polished the frets. So this is kind of where the setup, actually begins, right? So the first things first is we want to stretch the strings real quick, and then we're going to get into the relief. So same thing, but instead of lifting the string out, we're just going to hold it at the first fret, and we're just going to lift it up a little bit. And again, all I'm really doing by holding it at the first fret is making sure that the string moves through the fret slot and not lifts up or at an angle, causing it to break the nut. Okay, so it's a little bit more stretched. Some of them stretch a little bit more than others. Okay, perfect. So we're going to flip this around. It's going to be at the end of the 5th fret. Now let's really get into relief. What is relief? Essentially, relief is a term that we've coined to describe the amount of back bow or forward bow that a instrument has, right? So if I pick up a guitar and I'm like, this is too much back bow, what I'm essentially saying is that the neck comes closer to the strings in the middle than it does on the outside. And if your instrument has too much back bow, sometimes it actually will fret out around the 5th to 7th, 8th, 9th fret, somewhere in this range. Instead of that, you kind of get like some clunky sounds, right? So too much back bow will cause the middle of the neck to lift up and fret out in the middle. Too much forward or up bow means the neck that it sinks and it's farther away in the middle than it is the end points. So up bow, forward bow, back bow, whatever you want to call, it's essentially a bow in the neck. So it turns into an arch. So you can have perfectly flat, you can have back bow, or you can have forward up bow. You're wanting to use the truss rod to put the instrument into some sort of forward bow or relief. So how much forward bow on an instrument do you want? On a normal player's guitar, I would set it about 10 to 12 thousandths. Most instruments that I set up for guys on the road, I set up with about 10 thousandth relief. If they play slide or if they have a really heavy hand, I'll go up to about 11 or 12, which I try not to go above 12 because that's kind of pushing like high acoustic territory, So try to stick in that 10 to 12. If the player has a really light hand, like the guitarist that I'm currently teching for, I set his at about 7 to 8. And the reason for that is he has a very light fretting hand, really light playing hand. And he just likes the way that it feels more. It just feels better for his instruments to have a little bit less relief. One of the artists that I just got off a tour with, I always set his to about 12, slightly higher action because he had a really heavy hand and really liked to dig in. This guy doesn't play as hard, so I can get away with a little bit less. So it really depends on the player, but 10 thousandth is like a really solid number for about 90% of the musicians that I have come across. Now all that's great, but how do you adjust it? Well, if I was to pull off this fingerboard, right, you would see a rod underneath. You would see what we call a truss rod. Now this has a two-way truss rod in it, but like my vintage Gretsch that I'm working on that you can see some of the videos on, that has a one-way truss rod. So think like vintage Gibson, vintage Gretsch, an instrument like that. If you were to pull the fingerboard off, you would see around the 17th and 19th fret, maybe a little bit lower depending on the year, but exact placement doesn't matter. It's closer to where the neck meets the body, would be an anchor. And then there will be a long metal rod, and then there would be an anchor, and then the half moon washer that goes over, you know, the rod, and that's where the acorn nut goes on, that like your Gibson's PRS is a style of that. That's essentially the hex nut that's been grounded into an acorn. It's on the truss rod. So when you tighten or loose that, that adjusts the way the rod reacts to the neck. Now with a two-way rod, you can adjust the neck into back bow or forward bow. One of the issues with, you know, a single action truss rod is you could only adjust it one way. So if it's a single action rod, when you tighten it, it will only create back bow in the instrument. One of the issues with, you know, the single action rods is if you back the nut all the way off, sometimes the neck is still too flat, or sometimes it's still in a back bow. Like on older Gibsons and Gretsch's, I've come into, you know, situations where I have 10s in standard. The nut is literally setting on my bench. There's no tension on the truss rod, and it's still like 2/3 thousandths into back bow. So it's kind of unplayable at that point. No solutions for that. It's a whole nother video. But a single action truss rod, you can't add relief, you can only take it away. Now a dual action truss rod allows you to adjust it to add relief or add it or take it away, right? So dual action rods are a lot more versatile. That's what I prefer in any instrument, because it's cool to have the single vintagey thing going on, but like if you can't add relief, you can only take it away. You are now having to add relief on those vintage instruments with thicker strings, because, you know, thicker the strings, the more it pulls on the neck. So single action, you can only take away relief, you cannot add it, only take it away. On a dual action, you can add it or take it away. So we're strung up to pitch. Let's grab our wrench. We're gonna put the strings back in the slot. Now, a quick rule of thumb to measure is hold down on the first fret, where the body, and then we'll tap it. So we're at about 8 thousandths. Now, when I'm adjusting it, I'm gonna move the strings out of the way. So as I adjust this, I don't accidentally press on the string and cause it to break the nut. So we're gonna do a little bit of a turn to the right. And now we added about, we about doubled it. So now we're gonna pull it towards us. Find where it catches. There it goes. We're essentially back to where we started. And then if I kept coming this way, it would back bow. So if you go towards the treble strings, right? I know I'm adding a lot of relief in there, freaking out some people. If you go towards the treble on a two-way, it's gonna add the relief. If you come towards the bass on a two-way, you're gonna flatten it out and then add back bow. So how do we measure it to properly set it? So there's a few different ways to set it. I'm gonna show you the more shop official way, and I'm gonna try to show you the cheapest tools that you can do it and still be precise. So we're gonna use the Music Nomad straight edge. I have their little try with the notched on two sides and then the straight here. And then I'm gonna use some feeler gauges. Feeler gauges you can buy at any automotive shop, pretty cheap. You can Amazon them. It's not gonna cost a lot of money. Okay, so I'm gonna take my straight edge. I'm gonna place it between the G and the D string. Now using the 6/1000th, I'm going to come in here on the 7th fret, keeping it parallel to the body, or to the net. I'm going to slide it across the fret. As I go side to side and back and forth, I've got a little bit of wiggle room, but not a lot. Now let's try this 12. So we're going to keep it parallel to the net. And see, when I press it up against the straight edge, it literally moves the straight edge. And then if I force it underneath, it will literally rock it back and forth. So we know it's not a 12, and we know it's not a 6. I'm going to guess it's a 7 or an 8. We're going to try the 8 first. So we're going to slide it under. It is actually not an 8. The 8 barely goes through. Well, I shouldn't say it's not an 8. It could be an 8. So let's try the 9. It's a little snug. Okay, so it is not a 10. Now, if you notice, sometimes I go in and then I lift up and over. What I like to do is I like to come in. Now, first I want you to learn going this way, because that's how I was taught, and I think that's the best way. What I like to do is I like to come in on the 6th fret, lift up against the straight edge, and follow that straight edge to see if I can go across the fret. Okay, so we're going to take our wrench, we're going to pull our strings out of the slot, and we're going to go to the right, just the tiniest bit. Okay, so let's put the straight edge back on. The 10 goes through beautifully. Let's try the 11. It's a very, very snug 11, but the 11 will go through. So let's see if we can just tighten it just the tiniest bit. We're going to have to pull the strings off. It's going to try to cheat it, but nope. Okay. One more time. Okay. It is at 10. So that's how you adjust the relief. So let's just go over it again real quick, right? So when you string up the instrument to tension, you always have to tune it to pitch. So whatever pitch you're using, you tune it to pitch. And then we're going to put the straight edge in between the G and your D string. Using your feeler gauge, you're going to keep it parallel and float on the surface of the fret and try to see if the straight edge moves. Once you've developed a hand for that, you can come in on the fret, lift it up against the straight edge, and pull it down. If it will not cross the fret, it means that the number that you are using is too great. So for this, the 11,000th would not go through the gap. So the gap is smaller than 11. Now, what all is a truss rod and what does all of the relief mean? The truss rod is the rod that is installed in the neck. A single action only allows you to remove relief, not to add, and a dual allows you to add or remove. When you go towards the treble, you add relief. When you come towards the bass, you remove relief. So before we move on to action, let's kind of explain. So we know relief affects here, and we know that relief is the amount of forward or up bow versus back bow. But what about fall away? Because you'll hear a lot of repair guys be like, oh, fall away, fall away, fall away, fall away. Like, man, you just need a little bit more fall away in your guitar. Well, what does that mean? So fall away happens here. And fall away is the interaction between the neck and the body. Sometimes confused between relief and action. So action is the adjustment of your saddles at the end of the scale length. So your scale length goes from the nut to the saddles. That is your scale length. And adjusting this side of the scale length is what we call action. Just raising or lowering your saddles. It's as simple as that. But neck set is how the neck is inserted, whatever you want to call it, into the body. So if we measure our action, I want it to be about 4/64 to 3/64. The proper way to have a neck set would be, if this is 4/64, I want it to be 5 here. And if I'm at 3 here, I want it to be 4. So I find the best way, especially for shredders and the guitars that have the fretwork to be able to handle it, your neck set, or the neck angle, is set correctly when you can tell that the last fret is 1/64 higher than your 12th fret. Now, adjusting neck set on a Tele or a Strat or something like this T-style is easy. They're bolt-on necks. You can remove the neck, add a full pocket shim, put the neck back on, call it a day. On something like a Les Paul, an SG, a Paul Reed Smith, you either have to pull the frets and plane the board, which isn't correctly adjusting the neck set, but it will get you the same variance. But on a guitar like that, you literally have to steam the neck out, remake the pocket, and then lower it. That's important to, keep an eye on and to understand. Okay, so action is the adjustment of your saddles to raise or lower the strings. Okay, I cannot find my capo, so I'm just gonna hold it down with my finger. So I'm gonna unplug my tuner. Now I'm gonna hold down on the first fret, and then placing my straight edge, or my ruler, across the frets, I'm gonna read it at the last. So I'm going to read it at the 12th fret. So we are at 4/64, and we are at 3. And as I measure up, we gradually increase each number. Now, let's say it wasn't correct. Let's say it was something like this. And it's all weird and wrong, which on T-styles a lot of times, you will see them not set correctly. So now I don't know what the action is. So the best way to check it, or to, set it, would be to, if you know what the radius of your fingerboard is, just grab that radius gauge. So I know, because I built this one, I go from 12 to 14. So I'm going to use my 12-inch radius. I'm going to set it here on the end in between the saddles and the pickup. Now looking at it, I can tell you that some of the strings are really high. So first things first, I'm going to lower my saddles. I'm actually going to do it across the board to where all my saddles are parallel to the bridge plate. Even on the ones that I didn't mess with, we're just starting from the ground up. Okay, so everything is flat and parallel to the body. Now, one of the reasons why this is important, if these are at an angle, and imagine this is the side and this is a side, when they're parallel to the body, the sides of the saddle are or like even. But if one side's jacked all the way up, it's gonna start to knock this guy out of alignment. So you do want them all kind of slight curve. Right now they are being parallel, they're not touching. But as soon as one gets cocked too far up, it's going to throw them out of whack. So now I'm gonna hold down on the first fret. And I'm gonna raise this up to 3/64. So we went from 1 to 2. Okay, so we are at 3. Now we've got to raise this up to 4. Okay, got it locked in. A little bit more. Okay, so we are now from 3 to 4. Now let's come down here and let's make everything parallel again. Knowing that the high E and the low E are set, we're going to base our other saddle positions off of that. Okay, so now that they're flat, we're going to take our 12 gauge, we're going to lay it across the strings, and we're going to look and see where everything lays. So I still need to come up a significant bit in the middle. So let's raise it up. Okay. So I was a little zealous. So let's lower it just a skinch. Okay, so now the middle is close. Now we want to raise these two without butting up on the other saddle. Okay. I like where we're at. This is going to come up a little bit more. Okay, so now what I did is I established that the high E and the low E are correct by lowering everything down and bringing them up to where they appear to touch the 12-inch radius. I now know that I am in the ballpark of where everything should be. So now I can fine-tune everything. So we're going to look at the saddles, and the high E is a little crooked, so we're going to adjust them. Okay, now the saddles are a little bit more correctly positioned. We're going to make sure the strings are where they should be, which is pretty much going over center of the pole pieces. Now when I built this one, I notched the barrels to have the correct spacing, so I know that as long as they're in the slots where they are, and these are straight up and down, that's exactly where I should be at. Okay, So now it's tune up. Okay. So now let's remeasure and adjust anything we need to. So holding down on the first fret, a little high across the board. So I'm going to lower each. Lower each one just a bit. I'm right at 4. Now what I want here is I want to see on the low E, I want it to be right on the line. And I want it to be a little bit below. As I go down, I want to get closer to the 3. Now everything looks good but this high set. So we're going to raise this up a bit and lower that. Because the B was at 3 and the E was at 3.5. Okay. Perfect. That is how I want it to be. Now, instead of spending a bunch of time trying to get each individual saddle adjusted to the correct height, I like using the radius gauge trick. Lower everything down, get the E's set, and then on the bridges where it's applicable, like bridge like this or, you know, some of the PRS's, Fender, Strat, stuff like that, then you can raise the middles up to touch the radius, make sure everything's how it should be, retune, and then you can come through and fine tune and really dial it in to exactly where you want it to be, right? So we're where I want it, so let's retune. On an electric, for relief, I like 10 thousandths for the general player. For action, I like 3/64 to 4/64 for the normal player. I feel like 10 and 3 to 4 is a comfortable range. A lot of guys are going to pick up and it's going to feel really good to them. But that's just the middle of the road, right? Like this is the generic setup that I give most instruments that appeal to the most people, right? Earlier I mentioned a guy who had a little bit heavier hands, so I gave him a little bit more relief. Well, I would boost him from about 3 and 4 to about maybe a 3.5/64 to about a 5. A little higher on the treble, higher on the bass, so he could hit the bass strings a little harder so they can ring out and resonate and not hit the frets. The player who has a lighter touch that I can get away with like 7 to 8 thousandths on the relief, I might bring his action from 3 to 4 down to 2 to 3. Depends on the player, the instrument, and if it plays cleanly or not. Personally, on my instruments, I set them up to about 5/6 thousandth relief, which is a pretty flat neck. And then usually about 2/64 to about 3 or 3.5. If it's a standard tune, I do 2 to 3. If it's like a drop tune, like my drop C or a drop A guitar, I boost the bass, the low string up about another half to full 64ths, just so that when you hit it, it gets that nice, low, clear, low note, and it doesn't start to get muddy or fart out on you. So 3 to 4 is about the general rule for most instruments. So we've installed new strings, we've adjusted the relief, we've explained the neck set, we've set our action. So now what's next on the setup? Well, we have 3 things left. We have the nut, the pickup height, and intonation. Nut is something that I don't really love to dig into on YouTube videos because it's a lot more in-depth than just kind of explaining kind of the process. So I'm not really going to show anything on the nut on how to lower it or raise it. I'm just going to skim over the details of how you check it. Okay, so we've got the nut, fret 1, fret 2, fret 3. So what I want to see is when I hold down on the 3rd fret and I tap at the 1st, I want just a little bit of movement. So this is fret 1. So if we hold here, you can see just the littlest bit of movement. And that is what I'm looking for. So that's what I'm hoping to see on the nut. Now if it's too low and it's laying on the 1st fret when you hold the 3rd, then you've got to raise the nut slot up. If it is too high and you're pressing it and there's a lot of movement, then you're going to want to come in here with a file and lower it. There will be more videos detailed specifically to nuts coming, just not right now. As long as it plays cleanly open, that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to do pickup height and intonation. Okay, so for pickup height, it's a very player specific thing. These are set up to what I like to call spec for single coils, which is 2/32 to 3/32, or 4/64 to 6/64. On single coils, with the way the magnetic field works, because especially on this bridge, because it's a hotter bridge pickup, if you hit it on like a Strat, a Tele, anything with a single coil, and you can kind of hear it sounds like it goes out of tune a little bit when you strum it hard, could be because your pickup's up too high. Because, the string moves in a cylindrical shape, but if the pickup is too close and that magnet is powerful, it's going to pull it down and create more of like a oblong rotation rather than a perfect circle. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're playing your single coil and you feel like you're going out of tune and you're checking it and you're in tune, but when you hit it, you can kind of hear like, I'd say, a warble of tuning. Could be because the pickups are too high. So a good rule of thumb is 2/32. So if you hold down at the last fret and measure the distance between the top of the pickup and the bottom of the string, a good rule of thumb on single coils is 2/32. If you do it to your bass, 3/32 is a good rule of thumb. On high output humbuckers, I set them up to about the same, 2/32 to 3. Now if I'm playing like a PAF style or like a P90, I'll actually kind of go somewhere in the middle, and I'll do, so 2/32 is 4/64. And this would be 6/64. So I'll actually split the difference and do 5 on like a PAF humbucker or a P90, and I'll do 5/64 across the board, and then I'll listen to it and adjust or lower as needed. It's a very subjective thing, and it's a very use your ear thing. And when I send this out because this is a prototype and I'm trying to get it in the hands of different players that I've toured with and worked with, when I send it out with them, I actually have a sheet of all of the things that I set their guitars up to the road. So I'll adjust these to what they prefer, and then I'll make tweaks depending on what this style of pickup is. I believe it's the Brown Sugars from Bare Knuckle, but it's been too long to remember. Pretty sure it is. It's the Jimmy Pagey-esque ones that Bare Knuckle has created. So yeah, pickup height is important to set, but I really only adjust it if they're too high or too low. If they're kind of in the acceptance spot, like if this was 5/64 and this was 7/64, as long as it didn't go out of tune when I played it, I would leave it. Because maybe that's where they set it. And it's always worth asking the player, is the pickup height where they want it? Perfect example, one of the guys I teched for, his one instrument, his pickups are really low on it. On his other, they're really close to the strings. And I know from experience, when you adjust it, you change all of their sounds. Well, he just programmed everything into his fractal. So before I adjusted them, I said, hey, how do you like the sound of these pickups? On this guitar are really low, and on this guitar they're really high. And we ended up balancing out to kind of where they were kind of met in the middle of both sets. But I say that to say, if it's your instrument, take measurements holding down on the last fret and the distance between the pickup and the string. Write them down so if you don't like what you adjust, you can go back to it. But you've really just got to listen to it. So now this is where intonation comes into play. So intonation is the fine tuning of the instrument. So I like to do it in playing style, but for this video we're going to do it lying down. It's the adjustment of your saddle, forward or backwards forwards, however you want to call it, to adjust the note. So if I hit an open string and I'm in D sharp and I fret it and I'm really sharp, I want to bring the saddle forward. Now, if I fret it and I'm really flat, I want to pull the saddle back, right? Okay. So we're going to start with the high E. We're actually going to just tune everything close. Don't spend a lot of time getting it perfect, just get it within spec. Okay, so if you've never read a Peterson before, if it rotates up, that means you're sharp. If it goes down, it means you're flat. So you essentially want it to stop in the middle. And then when we fret it, that's a little sharp. Now because this is a telly, we're going to do them in pairs, not individually. So now we're going to come to the A. Now, one reason I like to do it in playing style is because when you're pressing down like this, overhead, it's a lot harder to fret it as you would if you were playing the instrument, especially with taller frets on this. I want it to be as close to what I'm actually going to be playing it as possible. So I will come in here and I will try to fret it as I would if I were playing it. So let's do it again. So now that looks all right, but again, I'm still not as close as I could be because I'm using my thumb or my finger. So let's grab a pick. Okay, so now I'm going to pick it like I would play it, and I'm going to fret it as I would play it. See, if I press real hard, I go out. If I barely press it, I can get it closer to what it should be. So just keep that in mind as you're intonating it, that you want to try to intonate it and fret and pick as you would, as close as what you would on stage. We are going to pull the saddle forward. So I'm going to loosen the screw. I'm going to press it forward. Now let's see. Now this I'm going to leave because even though the F is a little sharp, the C is a lot closer than the F. And if I bring it forward or backwards at all, it's going to throw the C out. And right now I have two strings that are a little bit sharp, and I'd rather have one a little sharp and a little sharp than one a little flat and a little sharp, if that makes sense, right? So let's do the next pairing. Okay, so let's just say we loosen this all the way. What would that do to the intonation? Let's not do it all the way. Let's do a couple of rotations. Okay. So you can see it really loosen the tension on the strings. It's pretty sharp. Okay, so we're going to bring it back and we're going to set it correctly. Now, I showed proof of why I prefer to do it as close to playing style as possible, because it's just a more accurate read. Now, when I set up my guitars for any client, I always do everything in playing position. So I check the intonation, the relief, the action, everything that I can do, either wearing the instrument or in playing position on my bench. I do. I'll adjust that after the video. So if you're teching for an artist, you obviously can't play exactly how they play it. Or if you're teching for a client, you can't play it exactly how they play it. So let's remove as many variables as possible and learn how to set up the instrument on a flat bench. And then when you get really good and are comfortable and have a gentle touch with the tools and setting up your instrument, then start to, as you can, work on adjustments and measurements in the playing position. Now, cleaning the frets, cleaning the fingerboard, all of that, still do laying down. But when you're ready to actually like adjust relief and measure it, put it in playing position. When you're ready to full on measure action to, the finest, so lower them and then measure them, the outer two, and then after you do the radius and all that and you're ready, like dial it in, then put it in playing position. It is gonna change it a little bit. Some instruments are more temperamental than others. I found that Floyd Rose can be very temperamental between laying, playing position, and then wearing it. So just keep that in mind. Learn the basics of tool safety, protecting your instrument by setting up your instruments flat. Once you feel more comfortable, then put it on its side. And then when you're really comfortable and you know that you're not going to damage any instruments, wear it while you adjust it. You're going to find a big change of a lot of you will find that your setup's going to go to the next level. What I do is if a guy brings in, let's say this was a client's guitar, I would set it up all on my bench, on the flat and then on the side. I would do the relief, the action. I would not regulate it, but I would check the nut and then the pickup height and all of that. I would check everything, adjust the relief and the action. And then once everything was close, then I would wear it. And then I would make all my final tweaks. So that way there's less chance for anything to happen, but you've already dialed it in about 90% of the way. So that's how I would set up my instrument. So this has been a quick run through. So let's just recap. We took the old strings off. We polished the frets out with the Zona paper so that you can get down below in my link. And we used a spray bottle of water and we cleaned the fingerboard. Then we used some Music Nomad F1 oil. We hydrated the board. We used one of their Fano cloths to polish out the frets. We put new Ernie balls on it, tuned it a half step down. We've stretched them a few times. We adjusted the relief, and then we looked at we discussed the neck set, and then we did our action. Then we went over about what the nut height is, spoke a little bit about pickup height, and then we adjusted intonation. That is how I feel like is the proper formula for a proper setup. That's how you set up your guitar to play great. There'll be more in-depth videos on little tricks and tips that you can do to make your guitar play better. But this is a general setup for the general person. Thank you for watching.